Hi, everyone. I am Kelly, and this is Vote Her In. Vote Her In is a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics, now Two Broads Talking Politics Live with video, and author Rebecca Sive, who is the author of a couple of books, including Vote Her In, Your Guide to Electing Our First Woman President. We are coming to you 16 hours before the inauguration of Joe Biden as president and Kamala Harris as vice president. I have been literally dancing around my house all day about this. So I am going to turn it over now to Rebecca, who will introduce our guest. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly. And yeah, I think we've all been dancing around. One of my girlfriends sent me a text earlier. She said, I can't tell you how excited I am. You know, it's just a remarkable occasion, a really important occasion, a very serious one. Before I introduce our guests, I just want to acknowledge the fact that at least some of us were able to watch the president-elect and the vice president-elect this evening at this candlelighting memorial to the COVID victims, and we join them in thinking about everybody as we go forward. But in terms of thinking about everybody, what we have always focused on, of course, is on the matter of women and women's leadership and women's policy matters. And we thought, what better time than this evening, as they take office tomorrow, to take a look at the federal policy and legislative agenda that various organizations are proposing and that the Biden-Harris administration is contemplating. And lo and behold, we should have bought lottery tickets or something. This afternoon, the Biden-Harris administration announced a new commission that they will form on gender issues and gender policy with very high-level leadership, really serious people. And our guest is going to get into a whole lot more of this. I want to tell you that a name that's probably familiar to many of you, Christie Hefner, who has been a strong and influential women's political advocate since the mid-1970s at the National Women's Political Caucus, and is presently, among other things, a board member of the Center for American Progress Action Fund. And in that capacity, she really has kept up to speed and contributed, of course, to the development of CAP's Women's Issues Agenda. So we are so glad that Christie's here. It's a treat always to be with girlfriends. And we won't talk about how many years, but I think that's something I say almost every time. Christie, welcome. And if you would, just begin by sharing with us and our listeners, your sense of the context in which we're thinking about these issues.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca and Kelly, for inviting me, especially on such an auspicious moment. So it's an honor to be having this conversation on the eve of the inauguration. I am reminded of the fact that, as has been expressed in thinking about a variety of aspects of life, from health and medicine to education, this pandemic has really magnified issues that were there anyway. And in some cases, which is why I am optimistic, is, I think, expediting the movement forward to addressing those issues. And in the case of any organization thinking about how to deal with this truly unprecedented global pandemic, the first instinct is just to respond, to try and figure out what to do in the moment. And that's usually followed by a sense of, well, how do we recover? But the third phase, I think, is about how do we build resilience for the future? And I think it's that latter piece that is going to create the opportunity for an administration with, as you noted, Rebecca, in the formation of the commission, the inclination and the people power to act on that, to actually build the kinds of changes that will not only address the grievous problems that the pandemic has caused in terms of the loss of women in the workplace, in terms of the impossibility of the lack of availability of childcare, but the structural problems that were there before and that we could use this moment to actually address.
So one of the things to follow or moment on this issue of structural change, there's something in these commissions that sometimes causes me doubt. But I think that as you've been looking at that kind of work and as you've done it at CAP, how have you seen that sort of format take shape where it really does have an impact? What would you be whispering in the ear of Kamala Harris about it if you were there doing that?
Well, candidly, one of the things that gives me great hope is that the lead public policy economist on the project a decade ago that we did at CAP, which was called A Woman's Nation, which was the first analysis of the status of women in America since Eleanor Roosevelt had chaired the Commission on the Status of Women during the Kennedy administration. And it was very much prompted by the fact that women were now more than 50% of the workforce. And so what did we need to do to fully empower women's participation in the workforce to create economic growth for the country? What I was referencing as one of my points of hopefulness is that the woman at CAP, who I worked very closely with on it, was Heather Boucher. And Heather is the senior economic advisor to the Biden-Harris administration.
Right.
So she comes to the administration with a deep understanding of these issues, a deep commitment to them, an economist's keen, eye for measuring impact and not thinking of this as anything that feels good we should do, but we need to put our resources behind the things that will really improve the quality of women's lives and families' lives and our communities and therefore our nation. And all of the background of the work that was done a decade ago, whether it was around affordable childcare or around paid leave or around the need to address the problems of the lack of certainty in scheduling or around minimum wage. So I think this particular commission at this moment in time in this administration, staffed, if you will, the way this administration is going to be an example of how to actually move things forward.
Yeah, I think the staffing of the administration is what gives me a little hope in this commission, that they are already in the cabinet appointments, sort of putting their money where their mouth is, in a sense, and making sure that women are fully at the table.
I think this is another one of those examples where even if Biden was not your first choice during the primaries, and as Rebecca knows, he was not my first choice, in truth, he may very well be the best qualified in this moment to move the country forward. And one of the reasons is that he was uniquely qualified to put together an administration that both reflected the diversity of America, but also is not going to have much of a learning curve. And we really need that right now.
So we will have, as president and vice president, 2 pro-choice, 2 equal rights amendment quality advocates, one of whom, of course, is a woman. And I'm never going to be able to stop smiling when I think about Kamala being vice president. And we will, as of tomorrow, when Kamala swears in 3 new senators, the Democrats will have control of the U.S. Senate and the House. So we're positioned now, Democrats are positioned now, the country is to make legislative headway on some of these policies, that these things that the commission comes up with, the things that the administration wants to put forward, may actually be able to happen. So what are some of the proposals, the things that CAP has made in this arena, things that you think should be really the priorities now?
Well, I do think it's pretty obvious that the first initiatives are going to be very focused around dramatically accelerating the successful distribution of the vaccine, because sort of all roads lead to Rome. I mean, if we can't get more people vaccinated more quickly, then our chance of recovery from the pandemic caused recession is very limited. So I think there's a whole bundle of things that frankly were doable a month ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, and 9 months ago, and this administration chose not to listen to the science and not to do them. So that I think is going to be important, because I think it's going to help build what Biden-Harris needs very much, which is some early successes that actually impact people's lives, that will sustain and build their popularity, so that then as they move on, they're bringing people with them. So I do think that that will happen. But on specifically, Kelly, to your question with regard to where are some of the near-term recommendations that CAP is making, and where do I think that'll intersect with the administration? I do think that these issues that are the truly literal bread and butter issues, so they impact women disproportionately, but by extension, because of the number of breadwinner women there, families and communities are going to be front and center. So I think that we may finally get to a meaningful expansion of paid leave. I know right now the initial proposal is sort of for a period of time, but any of us who are students of government know that often that is the foot in the door, and then you build on that. So I think, given that we are virtually the only developed economy that does not have paid family leave, which is a huge burden disproportionately on women, I think that will get tackled fairly quickly. Something that might not have gotten tackled so quickly, but that the pandemic is going to, I think, make possible, is the really egregious lack of quality, affordable childcare. And that's a combination of money to providers, which is in the bill that's been proposed, and money in the form of tax credits to the users of childcare. And in some analysis that was done as a part of CAP recommendations, a full 70% of women who work with children under 6 said that their daycare resources either were closed or had greatly curtailed their hours. Well, you know what happens when that is the case. Exactly what's been happening. 4 times as many women left the workforce in September as did men. The entire total of jobs lost in December could be calculated as women who lost their jobs in December. And so I think the childcare piece is going to be more prominent than it might have been without the impact of the pandemic. And that's a hugely important thing if we're talking about systemic change for women. And then I think that some of these issues that have to do with kind of disparity still in wages are going to get addressed. And I'm hoping, and I believe it will be multi-pronged. So I think there's going to be a kind of acceleration of what has been happening at the grassroots around minimum wage, which is really exciting to see, because generally the best progress is made when you get both a bottoms up and a top down working concurrently. And we've seen the Fight for 15 as very much a bottoms up movement that's gotten really impressive traction in a number of states. I think you marry that now with an administration in Washington and the legislative leadership in Washington that is also committed to that. That's going to be, I think, really an increase in that velocity. And then you also have this factor of what's happened, for example, as compared to 10 years ago when I was talking about the Women's Nation report, in the private sector. You now have a much more willing to use Sheryl Sandberg's expression, lean in private sector around issues of diversity, issues of inclusiveness, issues of equity, and social justice issues writ large, so that when, say, a CAP makes a recommendation about there should be more transparency of pay, there needs to be more measurement of, are there disparities either in gender or in race within compensation in your company? Because if you don't measure it, you're not going to address it. That was a kind of an outlier view, 10 years ago. Today, you have organizations that actually evaluate companies for recommendations to institutional investors like pension funds, saying, we want this kind of information. So there's pressure coming from all those sides in a very good way.
So related to that, see, Kelly refers to the fact that many of the people who are going to be in charge are women in these incredibly powerful executive positions. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you see the conjunction of this opportunity with these great new policies that are being thought about and systemic changes with the fact that it's women who are going to articulate them, tell their people to get it done, be the ones talking about it out there. How do you see those women, Jennifer Granholm, there's, several of them, Nearterm at Budget.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, we're hoping that our former CEO, Nearterm, and one of the 3 co-founders of CAP coming out of the Clinton administration, is the head of OMB, which is a hugely pivotal role in terms of, how we think about priorities and allocation. And I might add that while not a woman, a feminist, a fellow director on the CAP Action Board is Ron Klain, who is Biden's chief of staff. So I think that that philosophy of bold ideas, but actionable ideas, not CAP's sort of stock and trade was always, we don't want to be an academic think tank that publishes white papers that, has a press conference and then they get put aside. We want to actually infuse the ideas into the political process. And that's why they have the C4, but that's also why they've spent as much time in thinking about how to communicate ideas, how to tell the stories of personal lives affected by things like the pandemic, as well as gathering the real data about the impact and marrying the storytelling with the data. And I think they will be a kind of both ideas factory for the administration, but they'll also be a real ally, to your point, Rebecca, in reaching out through all of the electeds. And I would add, not just at the federal level. I think that a lot of the carrying water, to use that cliche, around why we need to come together to move forward in some of these policy areas is going to get done by governors, it's going to get done at the state level. And I think that's actually going to be an enormous help for us.
So just to follow up 1 second on that, and then I will turn it back to Kelly. But Christie, I'm going to press you for 1 minute on this matter. You were a CEO of a large company for many years. You know what it's like. You sit on various boards. You know what it's like to be the executive where the buck stops here, right? So Janet Yellen, take your pick. She probably is my favorite. I mean, what's going to be different, or do you think it will be different, that when people walk into that corner office and see these incredibly powerful and important women?
Well, I don't think you can ever underestimate the power of, if you can't see it, you can't be it. Right. And the power to speak personally about, life experiences. I mean, I think we saw it writ large with Ruth Bader Ginsburg in her ability to articulate to colleagues who were not necessarily ill-intentioned always, but sometimes just frankly clueless. And to be able to say, well, no, actually, this is what it means to not be able to, participate equally in access to credit or access to employment opportunities. So I don't think you can underestimate the power of that for sure. And I think that we've seen in both the House and the Senate that it is frequently the women that actually come together and find ways to move things forward. And so I'm excited by the fact that we have a record number, still way too few, but still a record number of women in the legislative branch. And we're certainly past the tokenism stage. We're certainly underrepresented in terms of equity, but it's a critical mass now. And I think that we're going to see that kind of partnership between women in the executive branch and women in the legislative branch.
Right.
Yeah, as a mom of young kids, I think one of the most exciting things to me, not necessarily the women who will be leading the various agencies, but the sort of next tier down staff that's been announced. Like the entire communications team is moms
all women,
and kids.
Yeah.
And it's
It
super
sort of hasn't
exciting.
even gotten noticed because there's so much going on, obviously. But yeah, that's a stunner.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So what can and should all of us be doing to help? You mentioned this sort of sandwich of the top down and the bottom up.
Yes.
What should all of us be doing to help support all of these policies and make sure that they do go through?
No, it's a great question. And I do think that there's a understandable but dangerous inclination whenever, we as progressives, we as feminists see people in the White House that represent, our values to kind of, relax a little. And that is not the right move here. First of all, as has been said in various contexts, we on the ground need to force the administration to do things that the administration wants to do, but needs political support for. It needs to be clear that there is a coming together around changes that impact women and girls and families, or there will be a kind of a push to address other issues instead, and it'll get pushed on the back burner. So I think it's critically important for the women who listen and watch this podcast to not for a moment think that now, we can lighten up a little bit. I think we need to be every bit as active, whether it's with organizations that are doing work in our communities, with our own local electeds, and with the broader objectives in terms of preserving democracy. I am, to put a slightly darker note into the conversation, very worried about what's going to happen with the gerrymandering that will come out of this census. There are a number of states where the ability to gerrymander out some fantastic women from their congressional seats is a real concern. I was on the phone with Lucy McBath today of Georgia, who's a fantastic congresswoman, and is in real risk of how that new map is going to be drawn by a Republican legislature in Georgia. So we need to stay engaged around voting rights. Thank you, Stacey Abrams, for showing us what could be done in a really compressed period of time from her loss to the victories in Georgia around democracy reforms like ending gerrymandering. I think we need to stay involved in those ways too, and to keep pressuring all the organizations we touch. We were talking about businesses earlier. It didn't just happen that the Business Roundtable, which is kind of the who's who of corporate America, announced formally that they believed that the mission of their companies was to represent the interests of all the stakeholders. That meant employees and the supply chain and the communities, not just the shareholders. That happened because of a lot of people, consumers, investors, activists, speaking up and letting those companies know that they were going to be judged not just by the price of their products. And so there are so many layers of opportunity for engagement.
So on that point, just a brief follow-up on an issue we really haven't touched on except regarding the COVID matter, which is women's reproductive rights. And, we saw last week the Supreme Court made a terrible decision on RU 486, something that you and I have worked on in years past. Thought we had won, but turns out here we are again. I wonder if you could comment for our listeners on what you think they should be doing, thinking, saying, organizing on that matter, because it seems like it's just a chip away here.
Yes, yeah, and we should talk about it because it's, a lot of the focus is on the precedent of Roe v. Wade, as well it should, but in reality, as you both know all too well, the actual accessibility of reproductive rights services to women has been drastically curtailed in the last decade, and we need to reverse that. Now, I do think one thing that is encouraging, and then I'll address directly your question, Rebecca, is that given the co-equal branches of government, what goes often to the judicial branch are disputes between the legislative and the executive branch. That's sort of the nature of how the system works.
Right.
Well, at least right now, where we do have control of both the House and the Senate and the executive branch, we should not be looking to the courts at all. We should be doing everything possible in this moment in time to move forward reproductive rights in a way that does not result in suits that are challenged, but results in executive action and legislation that then becomes a foundation. So I think that's one thing that's important. And so again, everything that we can do to make it clear to our elected House and Senate members that this too is a critical issue, and we have kind of a moment in time because we have a very bad Supreme Court where we need to build on the existing legislative framework, and executive action framework is important. But on the specific question there too, I mean, I think where we've stemmed the tide, Illinois would be a great example. It's because of the activism, of women working through Planned Parenthood and NARAL and working with, local organizations, whether it's the YWCA or the ACLU. And that kind of activism is very important to continue. And I think it will. I think, again, like the point I made about not leaning back because we just elected Biden-Harris ticket, we can't pull back from supporting those organizations. There was a tremendous spike in contributions to people like Planned Parenthood and the ACLU in the early years of the Trump administration, and that allowed them to do a lot of good. So we need to keep providing the resources to sustain that and stay the course.
So we want to honor your time as we try to do with all our guests, but one sort of fast question at the end, and then Kelly and I will say thank you. On this point we were just discussing, it seems that the vice president has a particular role that a vice president can play because she's a woman, because the VP is a woman. Any sort of messaging thoughts about that?
Oh, you don't mean a statutory role, you mean in terms of...
No, I mean as an advocate. Yes.
Well, I think we have to assume, certainly I do, that President Biden, coming out of the experience of having been vice president to President Obama and seeing what it meant to have a true partnership,
right,
and be extraordinarily influential, like the first person and the last person, right, is going to replicate that, which is going to automatically mean that Vice President Harris is going to have a different role than not any other vice president, but many others have had. And I think that the one thing that is clear about Biden, having thought as he has about running for president and done it more than once for many decades, is that he doesn't make casual decisions about something this important. So he knew who he was putting in the room where it happens when he chose her. And I think that's incredibly powerful.
I think too, it's telling what kind of relationship Biden has with his wife, with his daughter, with his granddaughters,
his sister.
His sister, that there's clearly a lot of women in his life that he sees very much as equals, as partners.
It almost always is the case when that is true. When you find in my experience, when you find a man who really is an active feminist, it's because he's been influenced by and is incredibly respected by and respectful of the women in his life.
Right. Right. Well, on that note, we're going to say to all our listeners, take Christie's words to heart. Go out and organize those men too, right?
Absolutely. So, we are all about building alliances and wanting to build the coalition for positive progressive change to be as big as I believe it actually is in the country if we can activate everybody.
Yes.
So, Kelly, happy Inauguration Day, right? You've got your champagne on ice, I hope?
Yes, champagne is on ice, and I knit a shawl that is designed to look like Ruth Bader Ginsburg's her cowl thing. So it'll be the first time I'm wearing it, and I'll wear my pearls, and I'm pretty excited.
Very appropriate.
Well, we'll celebrate like this with every woman around us. Thank you all very
Virtual
much.
hugs.
Virtual hug. Christie, thanks so much for doing this.
A pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Bye-bye.